Dearest Warrior Sages, friends, family, I'd like to welcome you, connect with you. I have a wonderful friend, heart sister, another warrior on this planet doing good for the greater good, Samantha Sweetwater. Thank you so much for being with us today. We have many friends and connections on so many levels of being. I'm realizing like week after week, but you, uh, so it's actually quite, now we haven't met earlier is actually quite amazing,
It
but that
really is.
I feel very honored and blessed. And Samantha, you're an amazing being with many realms that you surf and play in. Would you kindly share a little about yourself? And then let's just dive into what's real for us today, okay?
Yeah, yeah. I just want to thank you for inviting me to share this time with you, Satyen. I feel the same about knowing you. Like, how did I not know this beautiful friend, mentor, brother earlier? So it's just such a joy to know you. And hello to everyone. I just want to welcome everyone to a space that, since I'm holding it with Satyen, I feel sort of like doubly blessed to create a safe space for a conversation about things that are happening and that are we're navigating through. Um, a little bit about me. I was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, and moved to Philadelphia as a very little kid. And I have been a person who snuck out to nature from very early in my life to learn from rivers and trees and swamp mud. And the first thing I ever wanted to be was an ichthyologist, which is a fish scientist. And then I wanted to be a marine invertebrate scientist because I think slimy things have a lot to teach us about the nature of life. And my life has taken a lot of turns, but I've been really stubborn my entire life about being a very integral learner, and have studied science and legal philosophy and been a professional dancer and choreographer. I'm known in the world for 30 years of work that at the growing edge of conscious dance and movement as a path of spiritual awakening and transformation and community development. And my major work now is focused on the evolution of medicine and consciousness and spirituality as it pertains to plant medicine and psychedelics and nature connection, and meditation and embodiment. And so my focus is on the evolution of a culture that is a unity of science and what we call spirituality, where we come into the embodiment of who we are as mystics, as who we are as beings who are both subjects and objects, co-creating a world that is beautiful and vital for all species and all people.
Beautiful. Thank you, love. I want to go straight to the core and just ask you in your heart, because I know you feel very deeply all that's going on. There's so many issues we know we have in our face right now. I'd love you to share about where you're at with all of this, what's going on with COVID, the evolution of our planet, Black Lives Matter, civil rights. There's so many fronts that are going on. So where are you at with all of this?
I think I'm in the balance of being an eye in the storm and being the storm. And what I mean by that is, I would say the masculine part of my consciousness is really committed to the constant process of recentering and sovereignty, and also in the very clear arrow of the future that I'm here to help cause. And regardless of and inclusive of all the material that we are getting to process right now, I think that one of the guiding arrows, guiding lights for me is staying very, very clear about the long shot to a thriving, vital, ecologically majestic, culturally majestic, and diverse future. And simultaneously, I'm committed to the feminine dimension of processing everything through my body, my emotions, and the collective body and the collective emotions. So in regards to COVID, I've been really saddened to see where people are getting very hung up on particular issues, especially on the mask issue. But underneath that is this sadness that the field of information that we're swimming in is so hard to navigate and so polluted, that we're in this incredibly, I think at the core of everything we're experiencing is social injustice and a completely polluted info universe. And but my constant perception of COVID is that regardless and inclusive of any agendas that may have wanted COVID to happen or planned for COVID to happen,
or took advantage
or taken advantage of it, right? That it is a higher being, it is a higher intelligence that is truly moving through the Gaia field, you know, as a gift to slow us down at a time when we radically need to stop a lot of habits that we otherwise would not have stopped, and examine them and look at how they're structurally out of alignment. So I continue to feel that about COVID. I continue, like, as the cycle sustains itself, I feel more and more its benevolence and its divinity, even as it impacts people really negatively. All of us, myself included. It makes it harder to do business and harder to connect with people and impossible to cross borders, and creates all the situations that it creates. I continue to feel that it is forcing us, it's the card that is forcing us to face so many things that we need to face and change so many things we need to change.
Sometimes we have to face mortality at its edge, at its total edge, mortality.
Yeah.
To even have the evolutionary impulse or have a flame lit underneath our soul to say, okay, I need to come out of the automaticities of my current life. And we have it. So whether it's at its root already spiritual, or we make spiritual use out of it.
Correct. Right. Right.
So, you know, that's how we, you know, as I share with my friends, I say, you know, we can bypass it if we immediately go and say, okay, it's spiritual, but we're not taking a look at the complete picture of goodness and sadness, the horror and the beauty. That's a complete picture. But we can make spiritual use out of it as warriors, which is the shamanic way, to make it right, to make it of value. You know, I've heard, you know, what you just shared about the idea that it has a divine purpose behind this. It's born out of Mother Earth, or who knows. But many shamans have been sharing this recently, Ev. So can you share more about that? How can we embrace this from a shamanic indigenous wisdom way?
Yeah, well, to repeat or kind of emphasize, amplify what you just said, to look at this integrally, we have to look at the causes of, or the effects of COVID in an integral way, and say, do we receive those things as medicine? Do we receive those things as opportunity? And I absolutely agree that the effects of COVID are very difficult, and like they are difficult medicine, very difficult medicine. And so there's the layer where we say, okay, we embrace this as opportunity. We embrace this as teacher. We embrace this as gift. And then on another layer, when I feel into COVID as an entity or as an intelligence, and I feel it actually, you know, I, as someone who works a lot with plant medicines and has been working with animate fields intelligence of groups, of processes for my entire life, I feel things as fields. And so when I feel into the field of COVID, I feel a very benevolent energy. I feel it benevolent and neutral, like very non-dual, which, you know, all true medicines are in a sense. They say, well, they still give you that opportunity. They amplify the opportunity for you to choose what kind of medicine it will be for you relative to what it forces you to face or to know or to purge. And when I feel into the field of COVID and also like when I sense from a very non-dual place what it is causing, the chaos that it's causing in and of itself is a neutral force for massively necessary changes.
Yes.
So if we look at it as, as many of us have been saying something like this was going to come soon down the tubes one way or the other, whether it was some massive climactic disruption or food systems disruption or a pandemic, like we were heading towards some kind of systems disruption that was, and what's so interesting to me about COVID is that it's like this velvet sledgehammer of it being just bad enough that it forces all these hands of systemic fragility.
Yes.
But not bad enough that it's not like an Ebola. It's not like we've got, it's not so horrific that we've got massive death in our space. Like so it's forcing us into the deeper dysfunctions around how we sense make, how we talk about race, about our financial structures, about inequities between different nations.
The axe could have come down in numerous ways, much harder on humanity as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And although this has its, horrors involved, at the same time, we're coping, like we're actually coping as a whole family. There's all types of shortages and areas where it's broken, but we're still coping. And this longevity of time, I really feel like you, is allowing us to open to the voice of the soul, to the voice of nature, to the voice of the as-ising of where we're really at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's a response to your question in regards to COVID. In regards to race, it's interesting just to sit as a white-bodied person and speak to race. I feel incredibly committed to deconstructing my own white privilege and, in the larger sense, deconstructing white superiority and white supremacy. And again, taking an integral perspective on that feels really important. I was listening just recently to an African-American, I'm going to look up his name so I can name him appropriately, scholar, integral scholar on the subject of race, who made a really important point that that not to claim white supremacy if that's not where you're sitting, but that if we, again, and when I look at that as a healer, when I look at that as a abscess in the human soul, for me, I take it as a reality that we are, like, that humanity on a larger level is ultimately one family or one soul. And that what divides us from each other in terms of race are pathologies of ideology that are bound up with histories of shame that are then protected with groupthink. That's the more I look at it energetically in its nature as a group trauma, that white supremacy is an outcome of group trauma, that is the protection of the perpetrator, that also is bound up in the shame of the perpetrator, that then justifies itself by continuing to perpetuate itself as valid. And I'd like actually more analysis on that. It's something I'm really trying to understand, like, where does that come from? How does it become so embedded, so righteous, so committed to itself?
My sense of it is has a lot to do with, if we talk in simple terms of stages of development, just in terms of three: me, we, and then the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be subdivided in numerous ways, but to me, it's the essence of tribalism.
Mm-hmm.
Tribalism that is me-centric is us over you, and we had to be. So it's mammalian, you
Right.
know, where we come from the jungle, we come from nature, we are nature. And so those are leftover traits within us which keep us about me-centric, we-centric, because if we didn't, would be our tribe would be the one that would be on the other side of being smashed. And so that's still there.
Right.
And that's in there in all of us. And the people who came into power usually had, over periods of time, better forms of armament, better forms of weaponry, better forms of military organization. And therefore, we're able to clobber the other tribe into submission or wipe them out. And so we're all of us.
Right.
No one is no
Right.
one.
No one
one
is not, because we're here.
Yeah, we're here because we're the ancestors. We're those, the tip of those that survive war, calamity, famine, who knows what. Unbelievable. And our ancestors, all of them, have killed ruthlessly. So we have that all within us.
Right.
And the spiritual cultivation, inner cultivation, has always been about not just trying to, you know, in this warrior sage philosophy that I aim to share, the idea is if you try to get rid of that side of you, it always backfires.
Mm-hmm.
Yet if you can connect that part of you and open that tribalism and open that part, and then seeing, okay, my tribe can include my whole neighborhood, not just my own house here.
Right.
My tribe can include my town. My tribe can include, so not just my baseball team or my sports team, but the actual others that I'm doing life with in a wider, until it's all inclusive. And I believe that's the journey we're on, wherever we're on that journey.
Right. Right.
And so in terms of how do we get others to see that, this has been my query, and I've been working on it. I've been really working my best at this, in aiming to feel what's the positive intent in someone who would not want to wear a mask and say, you're breaking my liberties, this is bullshit. What's their positive intent? And if I feel through, you know, I see all my other good friends who understand science and such, and their side of it, and they're sharing, as an example, all the science behind it, the lack of, you know, all the good reasons that are there.
Mm-hmm.
So why would that not enter in understanding and hear and shift the attitude?
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
And these people are thinking the same about these people, are thinking about the same. And if we both recognize that, is using that as a antagonistic duality, that we both have a higher purpose. This side might want more freedom. They might not believe, and they got good reason not to believe a lot of stuff that they're told to believe. We have ample reasons to not believe far more than we do to believe. So that's also running in the system. But what's the deeper intent? Peace, to live one's life freely, to not be subjugated by others' manipulations, by having self-autonomy and self-resourcefulness, by having peace that I'm not being surveilled, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So what I've come to recognize, if I'm speaking to that intention, not the surface of the ideology or the whyology.
Right. Right.
Then, or if I'm even open to it, even just being open to it, I believe that solve is love.
Right. I believe that too. I believe that too. It's hard for me to sit with that with other white people who are completely committed to being separate. That for me is a really hard edge. And I've been looking at that in my own intersectionality. Like one of the projects I've done in the last, and I really recommend everyone do this, it's a really powerful project, is to go and to do a race, class, and gender-based autobiography and explore your own intersectionality around identities and experiences of race, of privilege, of tracking and hierarchy, And it's fascinating to look at what's there. And I discovered that there was still a lot of healing for me. A lot of it, and most of it had to do with resignation, actually.
Mm.
It had to do with two things. One is resignation, where I have stuck my neck out many, many times and been attacked back, with pretty heavy implications in my life, and lost other allies and friends, often who are people of color. And areas where I still have my own fields of separation against upper middle class white people and white people of greater privilege than myself. And I think that kind of an exercise is, and I've already done a lot of work around that. One of the reasons I live in Marin County is because it was like the most antithetical place for me to go in terms of building neighborliness. But it's way happier and easier for me to live in downtown Oakland. But I think that doing that kind of work really deconstructs these very subtle internalized forms that are like energetic forms in our own separation bodies. Like, to what degree can I dissolve my own separation body and just be a pure conduit for a world of connectivity and belonging? And like the strategy that you just spoke is such a profound tool to engage that kind of a world making. Because ultimately that world will be made of the relationships that we build.
There's so much factioning happening. People exposing their ignorance, and us and others slamming them and Xing them out. And my point of view is when we X out those people, they just gather and get strong together in the silence of our exclusion and in our slamming against, which actually can make it even stronger. The festering of being. That's why, on our page, sometimes I'll let people really go because I trust the power of everyone working it out. I trust the power of everyone's insight and capacity, even with very extreme opposing views.
Yeah.
Because if we don't do it,
who's going to?
We're going to kill each other.
We're going to kill each other, and we're going to kill each other over Facebook arguments of all things. I totally agree with you, Satyen. I really want to invite people not to defriend people on Facebook. Like, there's such a big movement going on of defriending people, and it's antithetical to what we need to do. It's and then amplified by Facebook algorithms on top of it.
Absolutely, and then played up. I learned. My teacher was very Taoist with a whiskey flair. Let's put it that way. And he would never take things so seriously, and would take things very seriously simultaneously. It was like a holding of all the opposites very loosely, but also from a meta disposition of awareness. I could feel it. And one of the things that I saw him always do was to get underneath people's ego. So even in dialogue where someone had an opposing view, very oppositional view, his intellect was very high. He could throw facts and this, but he sought, as Stephen Covey said, to understand them first. Just keep understanding. You can barrage them with your facts, with your make rights, soon enough. But if you hold back the barrage of your make rights, your counter arguments, your retorts, you're actually building a silent power by being the one that's the larger embrace. That does not mean agreement. This is the thing that you have to tell your ego, that inclusion does not mean agreement. Understanding doesn't mean agreement. And that is very good, because that way you can hold your own sacred boundary without becoming loose, without tearing open your chakras, without being, weepy-eyed or going to the other side or being manipulated. When you're whole in yourself and you can include, it's a profound power worth cultivating.
Mm-hmm.
I want to share this one practice. Patanjali, great sage of India, one of his teachings, aphorisms, was ponder the opposites.
Mm-hmm.
And I did this one particular meditation, and everyone can do this. And maybe I'll lead it through in one of these sessions, but just something you can do on your own. You can take a notebook, or you can do this internally or out loud, however you wish, speaking it. And that is, you go back and forth between these two opposites. Why you are in my tribe is. And you could talk to a person, you can think about a person, or you can say, those who are in my tribe are, the people in my tribe are, and you'll just say it. The Indian people. Then you'll say, the people not in my tribe are. Ponder the opposite. People not in my tribe are. Oh, the Pakistanis are killing the Indian people. Okay. The people in my tribe are. Well, we're actually the same country not that long ago. We're all, okay? They're my tribe, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, who's not in my tribe? Those who want to take over our resources. So now you keep going back and forth, back and forth. Ultimately, there'll be a denaturing of these opposites.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, a very profound wisdom will be born inside oneself. And if we do it internally, we don't have to do it in the world and blow ourselves up.
Right, right. No, it's really true. That's a beautiful exercise. I think one of the ways that I've been approaching all of this is, how large can I expand my sense of self? In my prayer, in my real capacity to embrace opposites, or to embrace multiplicity. And I think a very powerful example of that is placing Black Lives Matter as primary, because the circumference of me is clearly all lives matter, but the core of what's alive in me is to make space for, to amplify, to engage with, to educate, to reconfigure systems in a way that Black lives matter. Black, Indigenous, and people of color lives matter, and women's voices matter. And like the list can go on and on, but that there's a process that is a reharmonizing of the larger container within which, yes, all lives matter. That's uncomplicated in the circumference of self. But in the voicing, there's that which needs to be paid attention to. And to me, that's both a very integral way of holding this, what has become, what was an argument in the last few weeks, that it made me sad, because I felt like, well, we can all expand to be bigger than this, and actually make space for this vibrant, powerful, necessary healing that is actually part of all of us. And that any life matters more when all other lives matter. That's been very present for me. And then in a place of prayer, how can we actually expand the experience of self to include other, to, as you said, be more interested, more available to the other's perspective in a way that's not compromising to self, but also very expansive of the experience of self.
I believe that's our lifetime edge to play, especially now.
Yeah.
That our evolution itself that's the crux of it. Our ability to really understand, feel for what's it like to live in your shoes, Samantha. For me, as a man over here, different world, different life, that when I sit down with you, that I want to get to know what runs you, what's important to you, what's valuable to you in your life. What are your virtues? What's not important to you? What's fun and joyful? And this sort of, it's a sacred activism through sacred interest.
Mhm.
It's like getting interested in the most tenderest, unique, aiming to find the flower of each other, and then each other as families, each other's as communities, each other's as cultures. You know, I was very blessed to grow up in, as a youngster. My parents are of Indian, are Indian. My father was born in Uganda. I was born in Uganda, so we were just for a few years, and came to England, and then came to Canada, and came to Toronto area, and we lived in a very multicultural area. And our apartment building, when, you know, as young boys, you know, we get tired of eating our mom's food, the same food all the time. So when my friends wanted Indian food, they'd come to my mom's house, to our apartment. When we wanted French Canadian food, we'd go to Madame Borel. When we wanted Italian food, we'd go to Mrs. Girgenti. So we would go to, you know, different people's homes, and we got to get, everyone got to be curious in a good way, and we also got to celebrate our uniquenesses. And guess what? We're all in the same big apartment building. It just doesn't look like it's got walls. And we can feed off each other.
Right? Guess what?
The wisest ones of ours, the Mrs. Girgentis, the Mrs. Bakers, and all of those, they're not fighting over the things that people are fighting for at other places. They're seeing a state of unity. Their heart is weeping at the hurt that their children and grandchildren aren't seeing about our already inherent unity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's an amazing time to build the bridges, to feed each other, right?
I want to know what's most important in your heart right now. What's most important in your heart to share with everyone about this time and facing this time as a seasoned warrior, as a sage?
I feel like what's most important is to center in, there's three things: sovereignty, love, and clarity about what we're actually working to create. And the mysteries of time are so deeply in effect right now. I don't know if you can, there's a lot of beeping going on in my house right now.
It's okay.
I'm hoping it's not too loud. I feel like because we're in a chaotic node, like anything can happen and anything will happen. And each one of us is actually a lot more powerful to steer on the basis in present tense of the quality of energy we bring to every next step. That like the entire field, because it's in more chaos, actually is more malleable by coherency than normal. So bringing sovereignty and love to the space, and an integral perspective, you know, a perspective that can see different worldviews and not get hijacked to respond from a lower one, but actually respond from a more integral place. That in the present tense, those are the key competencies. So I'm really, I think one of the things that's really important to me is my own spiritual leadership and empowering other people with the useful tools, both of in terms of spiritual tools and also in terms of intellectual capacity tools to navigate this time. And then on another level, I think we'll live towards whatever future we believe is possible. And that's actually more true than we think it is. And so I think it's time in the present tense to get really clear. What does 300 years from now, what do we want it to look like? And I see a vital, exquisite, diverse, well-tended planet where humans have stepped into the next stage of our evolutionary birthright as in what indigenous cultures call original instructions. That we're a unique kind of species, that when a species gets to this stage of technological capacity and ubiquity and visual acuity, visual mental acuity, linguistic acuity, that we are then tasked through the power of our creativity and the power of the word to co-create the next octave of evolution on the planet that we occupy. And so, 300 years in the future, I see this exquisite place where we've reconfigured technology in alignment with ecology and with with all of biology in a way that is vibrationally coherent and coherent in terms of our use of energy, where we're collaborating with watersheds and soil sheds and ecosystems and species diversity, and where we live in a rainbow of beauty of our own human genetics. I mean, even the current genetics are so beautiful, because if you just look at genetic tendencies in the human species, because we are more intermarried than we've ever been before, there are more interracial children and multi-generational interracial humans on the planet than there ever have been before. And as that happens, we as a species become kind of generally more brown, but we also become much more diverse. The diversity of the genetics as we do that actually increases. And that's, like, to me, in and of itself, that's such a beautiful example of greater intelligence in complexity, of the evolutionary principle. Even if you just look at an algorithmic sampling of the human genome right now, relative to how much we've already and how rapidly in the last 100 years we've evolved. So, like, imagine what we might be in 300 years. It's so beautiful. And I in that 300-year future, I also vision, and I've visioned this for a long time, that right now we're, in terms of languages and wisdom traditions, we're in a collapse of the kind of family tree of languages and cultures and traditions and religions into this kind of crystallization. But that if we make it through this time, there'll be this explosion of distributed, of first principles that allows for this massive diversity of practice and of sense making and of storytelling that is very different than the homogenization we're seeing in globalization right now.
Wow.
That has, but is actually much
Star
more.
Trek when you're speaking. I'm just seeing us go off into all the universes, inner and outer realms.
Yeah. So I'm passionate, as you can see, I'm passionate about this kind of storytelling.
Yes.
And I think something that actually really started in a meeting with you. Something very alchemical happened in the first Wisdom Keepers Council, where for the first time I just said out loud, like, I'm an ancestor from the future and I know who I am, and, like, this is where we're going. And my hero's journey is not from the past to the future, it's from the future to the present, to try to figure out how to tell the stories that get us to the future that I come from. And I'm saying this again as a practice, because I'm working on this as the framing narrative for the book I'm writing, but I don't think I'm alone in it.
You're not.
Like, hey, y'all, future ancestors, we got to get there. So let's get busy, and nice to meet you. Let's keep going.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's what I'm passionate about.
Okay, you were shared earlier about sovereignty. Please go deeper into that. The cultivation of that capacity.
Cultivation of that. What I've been working on in terms of my own practice is, and this is also inspired very deeply in collaboration with Forrest Landry's work with the Immanent Metaphysics, is actually understanding the nature of self relative to all other selves. And that sovereignty is about owning my location in, you could say, in the algorithm of the universe. That there's only one of this one that occupies this space, place, and time. And that sovereignty is about coming into full awareness of that, full responsibility with it, and in a sense, full surrender to it.
Mm.
And that surrender and responsibility are like, they're a couplet. What I've called that for a while is coming into resonance. It's about bringing my soul in totality into the location that I occupy, which happens to be this body and this skin, this skin suit. On the level of consciousness, I can then also expand that experience of self to be bigger than this body. Like I can occupy this from this locality. I can occupy a bigger space, because that's the nature of consciousness. Consciousness, self can expand to as large as it wants to. But sovereignty is really very much about recognizing and taking full responsibility for the location I occupy. You know, and I've been coming up with working on this body of tools that really just starts. One of my favorite ones is to look out of my eyes. And it's really trippy when you're on a screen, because I can look at me and I can look at you. So we're sort of, I'm replicated and you're virtualized. But, and then I look out at the room and there's this realization that there's only one location in God's mind looking at the universe from this place. And that in and of itself is one of the most powerful thought tools that I've ever discovered.
Oh.
And I can take time with that, because once I have that thought, I can actually draw my energy back from anywhere else that isn't circulating in that way.
Yes.
And it's the fastest route to restoring that seat of residence of sovereignty. And then related to that is a meditation process, and this is one of the triplicates from the immanent metaphysics, of just coming into meditation, closing my eyes and affirming, and then sensing, I am being. And then breathing and tracking my breathing and affirming, I am doing. And then tracking that I have integrated the action of being and of breathing into I am becoming.
Mm.
And that the nature of selfness is this constant circulation, this constant circuiting of being, doing, and becoming. So even when we say classically in polarity-based, in duality-based spirituality or consciousness work, we polarize being and doing, which is actually a false polarity.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a sweet evolutionary mind trick where you first focus yourself on being, and you kind of like leverage the previous paradigm of like, oh, go into being, stop doing, now be. Yes. Okay, I'll do that. Oh, right, I'm doing that. And then you kind of like recenter into the core, the very refined seat of the reality of your being, doing, and becoming. And then just offer your experience, your attention to the experience of that, which anchors you in awake awareness, because awake awareness is then awake and aware to what actually is.
Yes. And
that once I do that, again, it's this fast short circuit, and then I can take that into a long meditation, you know, or I can just use that as a return, like if I'm triggered about something, or you know, I've gone off on some thought train or some emotional train, and it's really helpful to anchor in sovereignty. And then another primary teaching that I've spent a lot of time with in my life as a community steward is a teaching about freedom that is rarely taught in contemporary circles, and that comes from the Greek. And that it also comes from Dagana from the Iroquois Confederacy, which is that freedom and responsibility are unseparate.
Mm.
And so sovereignty has a lot to do with the place where freedom and responsibility are unseparate. And the way that the larger teaching around that I've offered for years is what I call integral freedom. And that in our self-processing of what freedom is, we do a lot of work around self-empowerment, which has a lot to do with the freedom to do, be, have, create, express, and go anywhere you want. We all want that kind of freedom, and that is an individual, self-expressed freedom that is about empowerment.
Yes.
And then simultaneously, there's a lot of teachings in the world right now about spiritual freedom, which has, kind of a spectrum of manifestations, one of which is just the ability to be with what is. And that goes all the way up to the highest levels of samadhi, of reunion with God, and being like free from the mortal coil, you could say, or free from identifications with any idea of ego or self. That's an obvious direction, and that is transcendent freedom. That's a transcending direction of freedom. But then in the category of doing or of immanence, there's relational freedom.
Yes.
And I think that COVID actually is our great teacher of relational freedom. It's one of the reasons why I feel like COVID is benevolent, is because we've really failed to understand the reality that we don't get to, like, there's no way, we're all in that same apartment building, and we don't get to be free as separate parts. There's no way on this one planet that is our only home.
Yes.
And so relational freedom is like the final frontier of freedom. And so in that place, coming into sovereignty it's about coming into your capacity for individual freedom and your capacity for transcendent freedom. And then also for the place where you are responsible for your part in a collective fabric of freedom, where you are available to the intersubjectivity, to the relation of subjects and subjects and objects, that is the constant relational field that we have to and get to weave together. And that we are weaving together, whether we feel it or not, as you said earlier. So sovereignty has a lot to do with that third pole being coherent in that third pole of freedom. And yeah, I think that's quite exciting. And I do think that COVID is our teacher. And I think it's a rigorous teacher,
Yes.
where when we have mindfulness, we're forced continuously to engage in these conversations that are consent-based, that are about how do we all collectively agree that this is a good enough agreement around safety and risk indexes. And those are incredibly vital learning conversations. And I don't know about you, but I've been tracking a really amazing growth curve in myself around like that being an ongoing process.
It's either we become less sensitive in communication, more arrogant, more entrenched, more heels dug in, or we start to learn to up level and become even more powerful communicators. And I believe the essence cultivation at this time right now in relationship, just as I loved what you were sharing, everything there, I was just like drinking that in, the wholeness, the completeness of your vision of sovereignty. That's what I would call the warrior, the one who consolidates all these dimensions and realms within the center. In other words, if the universe is infinite in all directions, that means I'm the center of the universe. Not egoically, just if it's infinite in every direction, then guess what? Every one of us is the center of the whole multiplicity, the multiverse, the universe, whatever, of all that there is. There's a freedom in knowing that, as you shared, and a responsibility. And what's also very powerful and beautiful is that with that, we also have great capacity. Each and every one of us now. I feel, and I'm asking all of my family here to embrace becoming the best communicator you could be. Learn nonviolent communication. Learn every type of communication method, whatever you're drawn to, go on the internet, look up books, ask friends, what we've been sharing, because it's going to be the bridge that builds our new reality. It's what's, we're seeing all the old forms, we're seeing all the impurity of communication arising in our news streams. We don't even know what's real or not. It's all the impurities are rising. Mistrust. We have to let go of all of that, right? So we're learning to start to reawaken our innate knowing of what the sound of truth is, as opposed to the words. People are listening to words too much. They're not listening to the sound of truth or the lack of truth. And so that's my call. And I'm so glad you brought that as well. And I believe it's our call and our great joy to take up, that we can learn to become stronger with one another, whoever we are.
I agree. And I think we, you know, something else I've been feeling, this week was an interesting week to assess what's going on in the field with all of my networks and colleagues and friends. And what I'm sensing in my network, and I don't know if this is true for all networks, but I'm sensing this, all of the normative pathways for connection got disrupted and new pathways arose. Like when COVID first hit, a lot of us ended up on these really awesome WhatsApp strings, and then we got totally berserk on WhatsApp and dropped off WhatsApp strings. There's been this cycling of recobbling together how we connect, where we're putting energy. And that's been kind of across the board. And what I've been feeling for me is an increasing kind of a sense that the river of time is moving very fast. And if I soften, I both am, I direct and I am directed. And like, it's like new colleagues, new relationships rise up out of the ocean. And it's very easy to say, ah, yes, we're working together now. This is what's happening. And I feel like speaking to that, because I have this, we have such deep work to do right now. And yet there's this kind of quality of responsiveness in that work that is very different than in any previous time. Because there's a constant fluidity to the field.
Yes.
And I just want to speak to the trusting the soul's knowing of what affinities to connect with. And then taking the time to kind of like look at, like elevate out of your own field of action and say, wow, what am I learning about my core affinities? What am I learning about my core gifts? What am I relearning about the things I'm actually really passionate about? Like in my case, one of the things that's arising is how truly passionate I am about the unity of science and consciousness work, of science and spirituality. And that's arising through partnerships with MDs and people in the medical space, where like the real conversation about the intersections between spiritual work and clinical work and best practice and research are really deep. And I get very curious about how that is arising for other people, as we're also being additionally shaped as more integral people, as people who cross bridges that weren't previously crossed, that were previously siloed, and now we're manifesting things out of more complex knowledge.
I've so enjoyed everything you've shared today. I feel so enriched, expanded. I'm sure all my friends here, there's a lot of richness in here to rewind, watch again, and draw from, and contemplate and bring into action. Samantha, how can our friends get in touch with you if they have any questions or want to know what you're up to?
I'm really easy to reach online through samanthasweetwater.com and also through Facebook. And this, one of my commitments during this time has been to stay open to Facebook Messenger, which surprised me, but it works well. since we are here on Facebook Live. So best to message me via my personal page rather than my public profile. And I'll find you and we will connect.
Anything else in your heart to share to complete today?
I want to thank the ancestors for getting us this far, for all of their love. I want to thank the higher guardians and guides and all the nature spirits and directions and winds for carrying these messages. And actually, I feel to thank thank Facebook in this moment for being a vehicle for connection and discourse. And Satyen, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank you for your tireless, exquisite work in this world and for the largeness of your soul. It's such an honor to know you better.
Thank you, love. Thank you, sister. Thank you so much. Thank you, friends, family. And yeah, we arise together.
Oh.